TupiTubers! I'm Julie, your animation buddy here on the TupiTube channel. Before we begin this week's session, I would like to take a moment to thank you all for your comments and supportive messages. Thank you very much for joining me on my journey as an animation student, and I hope you're enjoying it as much as I am. To recap, in videos 5 and 6 of our tutorial series, we were doing our first practices related to movement. And since these were introductory exercises, we started by bringing the point to life and moving it across the canvas along different types of paths. If you completed all the tasks we assigned in those sessions, you should now be able to perform small animation exercises like this one smoothly. And if that's not the case, I encourage you to revisit any pending practices and catch up so you don't fall behind.
Alright, it's time to move forward in our exercise journey, and we're going to transition from animating a point to animating a line. That's right, we'll be working with small line segments, but we're going to make it fun. In our next practice, we'll animate a little worm. To do this, we're going to open the TupiTube application and create a new project. This time, we'll use a considerable line thickness, so the first thing we'll do is go to the brush panel to change the line width. For this exercise, we're going to set it to a value of 22. Additionally, to make it more interesting, I'm going to change the background color of the workspace. I'll go to the color palette and choose a shade of blue. For the stroke color, I'll select white. I'm going to simulate a water worm moving through the wheel of water. However, in your case, feel free to choose whatever colors you like. We're ready to start animating our little worm. The idea of this practice is for our character to travel across the entire workspace, appearing at the left edge and disappearing at the right edge. As part of this challenge, the path it takes should be intricate and filled with curves. Since this is our first time using a line, the structure of our little worm will be very simple. It will take the shape of an S. It's time to start drawing, and I'll begin by making my first stroke just outside the canvas on the left edge to have a reference for where the worm will enter the scene. This exercise is quite simple to do and a bit repetitive. You just need to follow the procedures I described below. On each frame, I'll draw the worm, always moving it half a body length from its previous position and trying to replicate the front half of its body in relation to the previous frame. Copying part of its previous path will help give fluidity to its movement. Keep in mind that you should aim to keep the length of the worm consistent or as close as possible in each frame, even while it's moving. Another important detail to consider is that as you progress with the animation, you should change the direction in which the worm moves to make its movement look more natural. In other words, as it moves from left to right across the screen, it's also important that it goes up and down throughout the workspace area. If you make a stroke that you don't like and want to redo it, just press the Ctrl+Z key combination to delete it and redraw it. And if you want to adjust just a small segment of any of these strokes, remember that you can always rely on the node editor at any time. By the way, during the last practice, we did several exercises using this tool. If you haven't seen it yet, I'll leave the link here and in the video description in case you want to check it out. Once you've created the first 10 frames of the exercise, review it from the player. For this practice, make sure to set the FPS value to 12 so that the animation speed is just right and the worm's movement looks smooth. Keep in mind that while creating an exercise, you'll be constantly reviewing the progress of your animation, and it's natural to want to go back to earlier frames to make small adjustments after closely observing your progress. This is how your skills as an animator will grow. Developing the habit of periodically correcting and adjusting your exercises as you work on them will help you achieve a significant level of quality in your results. Don't forget that! Typically during this practice, the path of the little worm isn't pre-planned. It evolves as you create new frames. The important thing is to play with the direction of the path every few frames so that by the end of the exercise, the worm's movement is engaging and it feels like the movement of a small living creature. By the end of this practice, you should have created between 40 and 50 frames of animation. Let's take a look at the final result! Great! It's time to share it in the TupiTube community, and that's it! Next, we're going to make a small variation of the previous exercise. This time, our little world will be much longer and will behave more like a snake. Let's start by creating a new project in TupiTube. For this new exercise, I'll use a thinner line thickness with a value of 10. We repeat the blue background, and for this stroke, I'll use a green color to simulate a sea snake. Although we'll continue animating a line and the workflow will be very similar, this time we'll create much longer strokes with smoother curves, keeping the following recommendations in mind. If you're working with a digital pen, make sure that the lines of the new frames align as closely as possible with those of the previous frames. The new position of the line in the current frame should start roughly a quarter of the distance from the previous line. In other words, for this exercise, the snake will move a shorter distance per frame compared to the last exercise. This practice will require a much firmer stroke if you want to do it freehand, so the best advice I can give you is to rely on the node editor to correct any line segments that stray from the ideal path. On the other hand, if you're doing this practice with a regular mouse, I recommend cloning each frame and using the node editor to adjust the new lines as you progress along the timeline. You'll likely need at least 3 nodes per line to manipulate the lines accurately. For this exercise, try to follow the recommendation we provided in TupiTube number 6. In other words, aim to make the movements you design for the line look and feel like an animal in motion, even though it's just a line. Alright, let's take a look at the final result of this exercise. Keep in mind that for this case, we'll also be using a frame rate of 12 FPS. What do you think? I bet if I were swimming in the lake and something approached me moving like this, it would scare me a lot. To wrap things up, we'll share it in the TupiTube community. It's time for our final practice in this session, and although we'll still be animating a line, this time we're going to simulate the movements of a fish. Once again, we'll start by creating a new project, using the same line thickness as in the previous exercise, as well as the same background color. For the line color, I'm going to pay a little tribute to Nemo, so I'll choose a bright orange. To simulate the movement of a fish, we're going to use strokes that are mid-length, somewhere between the worm and the snake, making sure that the curves along the path are much more smoother this time. If you notice, throughout this session, we've been gradually reducing the intensity of the movements. For this exercise, we'll follow a very similar procedure to the previous practice, but with a few small tweaks. This time, we'll create lines that are slightly shorter than those of the snake. And additionally, the curves and movements of the fish will be much more linear, aiming to replicate the natural behavior of this little creature in water. In the last 2 exercises, we start from left to right. This time, we'll create a diagonal path, moving from the bottom up. We'll begin by drawing the first frame and placing our initial line outside the workspace to create the effect of our fish appearing on screen. Once again, if you have a digital pen, feel free to try drawing the strokes freehand, but don't hesitate to use the node editor whenever you need to make small adjustments. On the other hand, if you're working with a mouse, just clone each frame and use the node editor directly, just like we did in the previous exercise. Starting with a very energetic worm and ending with a fish that glides in a much more subtle way. Additionally, to add a touch of realism to this exercise, we're going to play around with the fish's speed in some parts of the path, using the acceleration and deceleration concepts we covered in session number 5. Alright, it's time to look at the final result. And one last reminder, we're working with a frame of 12 FPS. So what do you think? Does it remind you of a fish's movement? Let me know in the comments! Oh, and I almost forgot. We'll also be sharing this exercise in our community.
TupiTubers, we've reached the end of our second month of content. I hope you're enjoying this journey through the amazing world of animation. As you might have noticed, we went from animating a dot to a line, and even though we are taking it step by step, we will keep increasing the difficulty of our process with each new session to continue developing our skills as digital artists. Remember that it's essential to complete all the exercises we suggest in each session. Take your time, be patient, and hopefully have some good music playing in the background while you practice. If you share your animation in the TupiTube community, don't forget to let me know in the comments. You know I love going to check out your progress. If you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up, and if you're not subscribed yet, I invite you to join our community. Alright, that's all for now, TupiTubers. See you in the next video. Stay tuned!